Hello, hello. Welcome everybody to Industry 4.0 Club. I'd like to wish you a fantastic local time wherever that may be. Before we start, want to let you know a little bit about us in today's conversation. Keeping my stoic face, the main purpose of Industry 4.0 Club is to really accelerate the evolution of Industry 4.0 by having engaging conversations like the one we're going to have today among innovators, leaders, and manufacturing professionals. This is the Women in Manufacturing series, our Tuesday conversation, where we focus on tech and manufacturing. And in this space, we want to touch on the perspectives of women in the industry. We'd like to welcome you to our series on sustainability, because that's what we're going to be covering over the next 3 months. And we're going to be introducing women with a unique perspective on sustainability in manufacturing and Industry 4.0. Our topic today is going to be navigating uncertainty and finding growth in ESG. A little bit about me. I guess the best way to describe it is I'm a tech translator for everyday folks. I'm passionate about bringing business and technology together and ensure that there's seamless communication among diverse teams. I'm a seasoned Salesforce and marketing account engagement strategist, and I spend my days playing with the platform and unlocking its potential as we align it with the requirements and proficiencies at Cleaver Brooks, where we make commercial and industrial boilers. When I'm not exploring the endless possibilities of the platforms or where technology meets ingenuity, I am busy helping to promote, support, and inspire women in manufacturing as the state chair for the Texas chapter. And I am going to introduce my fantastic co-host and partner in crime, fellow Industry 4.0 Club co-founder, Grace Donovan. Hi, Grace.
Good morning. Thank you for that lovely handoff. I'm Grace Donovan, as Karen mentioned. I'm also a co-founder of the Industry 4.0 Club, and I am currently serving as the executive director of the Rural Engagement and Vitality Center in Eastern Oregon, where we are connecting university talent with faculty and students with community-based problems. And previously, I worked in software manufacturing, and before that, in copper mining. So Industry 4.0 and manufacturing in general has continued to find me, and I'm sure that it will continue to find me in this new role. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm so excited to have our guest with us today, but I will leave that introduction to you, Karen.
Well, thank you, ma'am. You are ours, meaning manufacturing, and no one else can have you. Just saying that. So today I'm excited because we have Rhiannon Gallagher as our special guest today, and she is the founder and business technology of Team Weaving. Hi, Rhiannon. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And like I said earlier, I will do my darndest not to geek out. And Grace, I think you have the first question for her.
We're going to encourage the nerd out. I can say we've had Rhiannon with us before, so we're so thrilled to have her back. We had a great time previously. We're going to make you front and center. But if anyone was not with us the last time that we spoke, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of the experience that you're bringing to the table and how your career took shape?
Right. So last time we sort of leaned into my positive psychology background. So we were talking about positive psychology for New Year's resolutions and how to make more positive New Year's resolutions instead of leaning into our gaps. So my background, I started out as a human geographer, studying the relationship between people and places. And then I had a long career in user experience research. So a lot of going out and talking to end users of software and sort of coming back and being their voice in software development and saying, actually, the nurses needed to work this way, the firemen needed to work this way, the hazmat teams needed to work this way. And then when I got into manufacturing, it was less about a single process and a single piece of software and more. It was just more complex problems, and we needed people to be in the room. It wasn't enough to have somebody being the voice of people. We needed to have people in the room, and that meant that we needed to have more complex conversations and we need to have more cross-functional teams. And I got really interested in the psychology of how you do that, right? How do you have good, respectful conversations among cross-functional teams? And so I got interested in business psychology, which is the psychology of teams. So I went back to school and got a degree in business psychology. And so now what I do is spend my time figuring out how to make teams emotionally intelligent as a group, right? So rather than having somebody come in and coach an executive, I come in and coach a whole team and say, okay, everybody's going to talk to each other and everybody's going to understand how their brains work and everybody's going to communicate better. And that's really important when we're talking about making big changes around things like sustainability. My other side is that I'm still a geographer at heart, right? I still really care about places. So I also run a nonprofit called Parents for the Planet, which is about people who care about and are sort of caregivers for the planet. And I'm also on the board of directors of something called the Southern Plains Land Trust, which is about taking care of shortgrass prairie, which we have in Texas, which we have a little bit of in Oregon, which we have a lot of in Colorado, which is actually North America's most endangered ecosystem. So we're sort of taking care of that ecosystem. So that's my other sort of tie into sustainability. So that's my background.
All right, you just secured yourself a future invitation again, so that we can talk about sustainability in place.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting because when I first started reading about you, I struggled to connect the dots. I'm like, she started as what?
Right.
And then the more I read, it's like, oh, that is just like the most logical flow, this to this. And the dots just like miraculously connected before me. And it's like, oh, this is going to be good. So, with that in mind, as someone with a psychology background, and this is always the question that comes up, is how does innovation in psychology play a part in manufacturing sustainability? So basically, the big why.
Yeah, that's always the question, right? So it's interesting. I mean, because why is when we think about change, right? And we think of even all of our sort of change management models and all of the changes that we make in manufacturing, there's always we always need a why, right? And every change management model that you talk about, whether you talk about the sort of the ADKAR model, the Cotter model, people need a why psychologically for the changes that we make, right? Why are you doing digital manufacturing? Why do you want to automate our factories? Well, all of it needs a why, and then it always has. And so we've always understood that it needed a why. What we know now in psychology is that we know a lot more about the neuroscience behind the why. And that's the kind of the interesting part. And we hadn't really understood the neuroscience behind it. And there's a step before why that we hadn't understood before. And that's really interesting to me. So one of the things that we hadn't understood is that before why, the why happens in the limbic brain, right? The do I need to emotionally care about it brain. So, but before that, the brain, just like everything else, right? When we're talking about sustainability, we need to understand efficiency, right? And the first thing that the brain does is it tries to evaluate how it's gonna treat something, and it wants to treat something as efficiently as it possibly can. And so the first thing your brain does is it says, okay, is this a threat? And from an efficiency standpoint, the brain is kind of hoping that it is a threat, because if it is a threat, it's going to handle it in the primal brain, which is your most efficient brain. It takes the least amount of resources to handle something in the primal brain, because the primal brain is going to say, do I need to run? Do I need to, right? That's your flight, fright, freeze response, right? And the brain's going to say, do I need to handle that there? Because then I'm not going to take any resources from anything else in the body, and I'm just going to respond with that little tiny ancient primal brain. And everything that you hand somebody, first the brain says, is this a threat? Right? So every time that we say, are you going to automate a factory? Are you going to digitize something? Are you going to make any change at all? That's the first response that the brain goes through is this a threat? And this is really important to understand. And we didn't really understand this for a long time. If the brain decides that something is a threat, it shuts down all of the other responses. Nobody's hearing anything. Nobody's getting any facts in. Nobody's getting any whys in. It's too busy saying, I'm going to be replaced by a robot. I'm going to be replaced by a robot. I'm going to be replaced by a robot, right? I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my job. And that's all that anybody's hearing. So one of the things that we know in modern psychology that's been really innovative is that we can see that in MRIs now. And we can say, okay, first thing is this is not a threat, right? We can calm that threat response down. That's the first thing that we have to do. And we didn't understand that for a long time when we were doing these change models and when we were planning out communication for how we were going to change manufacturing. But now we know that we have to do that. And so we can be a lot smarter about the psychology about how we bring changes like sustainability in. So that's been really important because that now we know that. Once we've calmed everybody's threat response down, then we can engage the limbic brain and we can say, okay, now that you have a little bit of ability to listen, right? Now we can start talking about the why and we can figure out what the why is. And the cool part about sustainability is that there's a whole bunch of different kinds of whys that we can connect with. And all of those different kinds of whys connect with all of the different things that motivate people at work. So we can tap into a whole bunch of different motivations that people have at work. And that's kind of unusual in terms of all the different kinds of changes that people go through. So that's kind of cool. And we didn't know that for a long time.
I mean, I didn't know that until today. So trying to process a lot of this. That's incredibly interesting and also makes a lot of sense fundamentally.
I am interested to see the difference in the scan.
Yeah, it's cool.
And what are some of the questions or how do you kind of approach maybe kind of over the course of your experience in business psychology, what changes have you made to kind of introducing change to limit that threat response from before this information was known to now that it is known?
It sounds expensive to people, right? Because you have to spend a lot more time up front engaging people much earlier on. You can't sort of sweep in and say, isn't this great? We're doing a new thing.
Yeah.
You know, so it feels more expensive to do it. You have to say, okay, we're going to be really, really careful about the language that we use. We're going to understand the kinds of threat response. And there's sort of a standard model for what kinds of threat response called SCARF, right? It threatens people's status. It can threaten people's certainty about what the future is going to hold. It can threaten people's autonomy. It can threaten people's relatedness, which is how they relate to other people on their team. It can threaten people's sense of fairness. You know, this is going to be much harder for me than it is for other people. And a lot of times what happens is that something that feels really cool and new and different to the people that are bringing it in is an autonomy threat or a certainty threat or a status threat to the people that you're bringing it in for, right? If my status is based on the fact that I know how to work a machine and somebody's going to automate that machine, you're taking away all my status that I've spent 30 years to build.
Yeah.
That's a big deal to me. It's not a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to me. So how are you going to change the language around that when you bring it in? Right? It's all about empathy at that point.
Yeah. And like having frameworks like SCARF, that's golden, to kind of help with that paradigm so that you're, as someone who's kind of leading change, understand some of the levers that are involved. So kind of on the topics of people, change, and bringing in sustainability, like in manufacturing, as you mentioned, automation, kind of what is the future here? Because we do, like, that is happening. This change is something that we're actively seeing.
Automation or sustainability?
Oh, sorry.
Or both,
Um,
or all of it.
I mean, really around all of it, but since so much of the change that we're seeing is automation, kind of with that change coming in, kind of what is the future here and with people as part of that?
Well, I think sustainability offers us a chance to sort of rewrite people's roles in some really interesting ways, right? And I think that we've all had that drumbeat, right? I think all of us that have been in the Industry 4.0 club for a while, and we've all kept saying this isn't people going away. This is people changing. This is people shifting, right? We've all said that. But for people whose certainty, like, what does that look like? Right? It's always easier for people to see what things used to look like than it is for people to see what things look like in the future. We have to recognize that their certainty is threatened, right?
Mhm.
So we have to start really crystallizing what the future looks like. And sustainability is one of the ways that we can start doing that, right? And so one of the things that we had talked about before I came on was one of the things that's happening is that we're starting to crystallize around what kind of data does that need? What does the circular economy of the future look like from a data perspective? And as we start to figure out what the data perspective of the circular economy looks like, that starts to crystallize the kinds of people that we need and the kinds of information that those people need to provide. And that starts to crystallize what kinds of people need to be on the teams and what we can automate and what we can't, and what kinds of roles we have and what we can't. And that starts to calm things down because that future starts to be more concrete. Right? And as
Yeah.
that future gets concrete, people can get more calm about it because it doesn't feel as ethereal. It feels more tangible.
I mean, and just being able to articulate well kind of the future vision, and people's perhaps, roles in this, as you were mentioning, you're going to need a whole bunch of inputs from a whole bunch of different people, lends itself to that certainty that oftentimes is what people crave when they're thinking of the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
I crave it. We all do.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's such a range, right? I mean, I think sustainability offers it's such a soup to nuts, start to finish. The circular economy thing is so broad, right? There's a role for everybody. You're a rules maven, great. I got an ISO standard and a half for you. Like, you can go read that. Like, if you love finding new suppliers, game on. Right? If you love creating relationships with local suppliers, right? And that's your jam, there's a game for you, right? If you love figuring out how to make processes more efficient so that you're not creating as much scrap, sustainability's got a place for that too, right? If you love figuring out new tooling, if tooling is your puzzle,
Mhm.
you're going to have to figure out new tooling for this. You're going to have to redo your designs for this. You're going to have to go out and talk to the guys that are fixing stuff, right? Because all of this data is going to be accountable for that. So there's all sorts of different roles to play because this is such a broad problem. There's so many different pieces of it that there's going to be a whole bunch of different new roles. It's really exciting from that perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think touching on the threat to uncertainty is, you hear the term sustainability, but then for that rules maven, they're still thinking, how does that apply to me and what I do? And when they can't see the connection, then the uncertainty kind of just goes off the charts. And then it's like, I'm going to be replaced, I'm going to be displaced, and things like that. So that, how does it apply to me, is, I guess, a question that you're always answering when you're bringing in change into a facility.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the other thing that we know from business psychology is that, and this is based on Daniel Pink's work. He has a great book called Drive, which is all about how people get motivated at work, right? And people thought for a long time that people would, if we just give them more money. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if COVID taught us a thing, right? It's not that, right? People get motivated by mastery. People get motivated by sort of learning new skill sets, right? Being on the cutting edge. And there are a set of people who are always motivated by that, but not everybody, right? You can't necessarily go out on a factory floor and say, hey, now's our chance to learn new things, and have everybody on the factory floor go, yay, I'm on board, right? That doesn't always work for everybody, right? People are also motivated by autonomy, right? Do I get to have control over what I do, right? This is what happened in COVID a lot, right? Was that people were like, hey, I actually like having control over my time and my team and what I got to do. That turned out to be a big deal for people. But autonomy is also about puzzle, right? Do I get to figure things out? A lot of people on factory floors, the thing that they're most proud of is, can I figure out the puzzle, right? It's not the day-to-day grind of what they do. It's the, when it goes down, and I get to figure it out based on all my experience and based on all my nuance. They're really proud of that moment when they get to figure out the puzzle, right? That's that autonomy motivator a little bit, right? And then the other one is purpose, right? People who are motivated by purpose. Am I doing something for a greater good, right? Bigger than myself good. Gen Z is really motivated by that purpose, right? Sustainability is exciting because it hits all three, right? I can create roles for you that have everything to do with learning new skills. I can create roles for you that have everything to do with giving you new puzzles, and new things for you to go off and figure out. And I can create a sense of higher purpose. So whatever your big motivator is at work, sustainability gives me a chance to create something for you that works. And that's very rare, that we can have a change initiative that's going to hit all of those three motivators. Usually it really hits one of them and we're sort of dragging everybody else along.
And I'm figuring it's exciting. It's rare, but exciting, but I'm figuring it's also challenging to kind of touch on all of the motivators to bring as many people as possible on board.
It takes a really, really carefully constructed communication plan. The good news is that people tend to be more tolerant of communication plans that incorporate other people's needs if they know that their needs are also being incorporated, right? So if you've asked me what my needs are and I feel like my needs are being heard, it's okay if somebody else's needs are also being heard. Where my fairness gets flared up is I feel like only somebody else's needs are being heard, right? But if I can say, yeah, I know that you heard me and you're meeting some of my stuff. And so it's okay that you're meeting their stuff too. You know what I mean? So it has to be a very multi-pronged, multifaceted communication plan.
So you mean because I said so doesn't work anymore?
Yeah, this is kind of what I'm saying. Or I think the other mistake that I see a lot of CEOs making is that they're still working on that carrot and stick. The do it for the company because it'll help my bonus. Like, that's nice.
Yeah. Why should I?
That's not going to inspire.
No, not really.
Yeah. And it completely divorces that sense of purpose. Like, if my purpose is helping the CEO get a bonus, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
It's
not quite as motivating as you think it's going to be.
Yeah. Now, I do have a question, because I'm sure, especially when you talked about a very carefully developed communication plan, and that is about transparency. Are people ready for that? Because I can see it as a double-edged sword, but you have way more experience in this than I do. So are people ready for that, for transparency?
I think they are, if you create the right steering committee, if you create the right, what Cotter calls guiding coalition. So if the people that are running that communication plan, if they feel represented by the people that are running that communication plan, I think it goes a lot more smoothly. If it is a transparent communication plan where you've got a bunch of people from IT and nobody else that are doing the communicating, it's going to be harder, right? So if it's sort of top down or from the side, and you're only channeling from one direction, and if you don't have good feedback mechanisms,
Okay.
right? So every communication plan has to have a lot of feedback loops built into it, and not just communication, not just feedback loops that are top down, bottom up, but feedback loops that are sideways, right? You have to recognize that within every organization, there's this organizational structure and there's this organizational structure, right? There's the communication culture that's happening from the leaders down, and then there's that one process engineer that everybody talks to.
Yep.
And that engineer sets the tone. And when she's in a bad mood and she's decided that it's not going well, everyone knows it. And it's not going well. Right?
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out who those people are, those social nodes, and you've got to get those social nodes on board. I spent a lot of time doing ethnographic studies of factory floors and sitting and watching and figuring out who those social nodes are. And
so the human geographer comes right back in.
Oh yeah. Sometimes it's the people who organize the chili cook-off.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes it's the person who's doing the first article inspection reports, and just happens to be sort of a crux of a process. But you've got to figure out who those social nodes are and bring them on.
Fascinating.
And get that feedback loop running sooner rather than later.
Wow.
Because they will bring you to your knees.
Wow.
That's key. That's key to the transparency.
Oh, by the way, Grace, if you haven't realized, if I start smiling like it's Christmas, I'm going into full geek mode.
I love to see it.
So on to the topic, continue with the topic of transparency. How is that related to the digital product passport? And then I don't want to bombard you with questions. We'll just go with that one.
So for people who don't know, the digital product passport is something that the European Union is putting in place, and they're putting it in place. They're a little vague about when the timeline is. They're putting it in place first for batteries. And what the digital product passport is going to be is this sort of the story of a part, right? So the story of a part from the moment that the pieces, the supplies come together for that part, to the moment that that part is taken apart and disintegrated, and all of the parts are either reused or disposed of, right? Everything, the entire life cycle of a part will need to be documented into a single document, which is a lot more than the manufacturers have had to be responsible for up till now, right? Because it's far past when the product leaves the factory doors, and far more supply chain awareness than you necessarily had up to this point. And it starts with batteries for really obvious reasons, right? Because there's so many terrible things that go into batteries and get away from batteries, and it makes sense for it to start with batteries. So this little document will be necessary eventually for all products sold in the EU, but starting with batteries for sold in the EU. What it gives you from sort of a people perspective is a sense of who's got to be involved in these conversations, right? So who do you need to talk to in your supply chain? Who do you need to talk to in procurement? Who do you need to talk to in design? Who do you need to talk to in process in order to keep track of the scrap and the parts and the COTS parts and all of this? Who do you need to talk to in shipping? Who do you need to talk to in sustainment? And then because you've got to account for, okay, and then we took back our product when it was done, and we took it apart and we gave the cobalt or whatever to other company, and this is what they did with it. You the product manufacturer have to account for that in your digital product passport. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So on the one hand, it's storytelling, right? Which is cool. We're humans. But on the other hand, it's this nice framework for who in this cross-functional conversation that we need to start having, who needs to be involved. And that's a good thing. That gives us a really nice sense of who needs to be in the room. It's not just about design anymore. It's not just about, the lean team. We've really got to get a lot more people in the room than we're used to doing. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, because now effectively we're talking about everyone who has like their hands on the product at some point.
Yeah.
Contributing to kind of the story of this product and this battery.
Yeah. And the truth is that the other thing to keep in mind with sustainability is that stuff is changing all the time, right? I was just reading an article about Lamborghini has just done a gigantic effort with MIT to get cobalt out of their batteries altogether, right? So they're doing an organic replacement for cobalt. They've created very successful batteries that don't have cobalt in them altogether. So as we're ramping up on the accountability for these things, we're also ramping up on improving the quality of the supplies that go into them. But I was talking, Deborah Dull is probably the expert in the circular economy, right? She's sort of the circular supply chain guru of all gurus. And when I talked to her a few years ago, she was at GE Aviation, and they were saying, around about 2030, we're not going to have raw materials anymore. That's not going to be a thing. And so as we start to run out of raw materials, we're going to have to start figuring this out. This is not a pie in the sky conversation. This is a physical necessity where we're going to start having to say, okay, where do we get that stuff?
And 2030 is not that far away.
So that was the assumption that they were running on.
And then when you were mentioning the Lamborghini batteries without cobalt, how things are ramping up, it's that necessity is also ramping up innovation.
Yeah. There's an intent,
which is the other exciting part. It's like that what necessity is the mother of invention. And when we're looking at not having the raw materials in 6 years from now?
Yeah.
It's a little doom and gloom, but that's when innovation really happens the quickest. So it's like doom and gloom, but exciting at the same time, because we know that the innovation is just there's going to be an uptick in innovation.
I think we've got so much, like the work that Grace does. We've got a whole bunch of infrastructure that we can sort of, just like we leveraged our infrastructure during COVID. I think we have a whole bunch of infrastructure in the United States that we aren't making use of yet that we could for this stuff, right? Like you could talk to a neighbor and say, hey, the aluminum that we were using as scrap, we can't reuse, but maybe the manufacturer in the next county could, use for something. Like we have all these manufacturing hubs in this country that we could use better to have these conversations about our supply chain that we aren't using yet. I think we have a lot of infrastructure in the United States manufacturing core to start having these relationship conversations or to build out that digital passport that we aren't having yet. And I think, sorry, geographer moment.
Yeah.
I think we can start neighboring in some really interesting ways as we start having this digital passport conversation that we aren't doing it yet, but I think we have the infrastructure in some of these manufacturing hubs. We just need to leverage it differently.
I think this comes back to a lot of the importance of communication. So making sure that the right people are connected, and that takes a lot of work and a lot of exploring. It's with a lot of different channels for people to communicate. That can sometimes be difficult. But as this is pushed more and more, as folks are looking to recycle, raw materials, I think those will start popping up. And it also kind of brings us back to the circular economy, which you were mentioning earlier. of, how are we designing our process so that we can reuse and so that it's not just a linear, like in, produce, kind of create waste. But how can we kind of build that kind of puzzle into our supply chain so that we are recycling a lot of our materials, we're reusing them. I think as this digital passport comes on, and I've seen certain companies in manufacturing doing this like for years, but it's just great to see that it's getting more popularity and becoming more and more necessary to be using a lot of the resources that we have in a more sustainable and responsible way.
Yeah. I think it's Luxembourg has a great model. Like they've created a little sort of, because nobody really knows what one looks like yet, but I think it's Luxembourg has created a little like pseudo digital passport so you can go see what one looks like. Luxembourg out there.
Did anyone else just see the thumbs down?
I don't know.
I don't know where that came from. That might have been a hand gesture.
I thought it was just my glasses.
Anyway, well,
do they not like Luxembourg?
Yeah. Oh, we lost Karen.
Oh, we lost her. All right. Well, hopefully she'll be coming back really soon. We'll get her back on stage shortly. But I kind of looking ahead, to the future, as we were just mentioning. Oh, here she is. She's back. Welcome back, Karen.
Miss me.
We did.
But then I said Luxembourg. I was like, wow, they really don't like Luxembourg. I got kicked out.
But you're back.
Yes, I am back. Now, where were we?
So we were talking about Luxembourg, circular economy, and the future. So, and kind of the importance of communication. So that really kind of leads me to perhaps a much more succinct question. But as we look to the future, and perhaps kind of for your work specifically, Rhiannon, how are you managing team communication around a lot of challenges that are coming up in sustainability, the challenges that come up with transparency that Karen alluded to, the interoperability of technologies that are going to be necessary for this, and some of the regulatory uncertainties that is like a puzzle that we'll have to figure out. So it's a big question.
Yeah, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
The changes are going to happen regardless of whether or not you're communicating about them. Right? It's like Pleasantville, right?
Yes.
Like, the changes are going to occur. I think what we need to do is respect people enough to give them feedback opportunities, right? There's a thing in psychology called the Hawthorne effect, which is that people always feel better about things when you ask them how they're feeling about them, even if it's something that they're unhappy about. Like they're less unhappy if you respect them enough to get their input, right? Rather than just pretending that it doesn't exist, pretending that it's not happening, pretending that it's not going to affect them. Respect them enough to get their input and respect them enough to be responsive about what that input is. Right? Like it's not going away. It's not something that we can sort of, ignore. So I try to build in a lot of feedback loops and feedback loops, meaning that we heard you and this is what we're doing about it, not inboxes. Right? An inbox is not a loop. So I think that that's really important, and acknowledging the flexibility and the fluidity of it, right? Like we're seeing tipping from a climate change perspective. We're seeing tipping points now this year, last year, that we didn't expect to see until 2050. So we have to be very dynamic about how we respond to things, and that's where it is. And we also have to recognize that we have Gen Z workers coming in who care deeply about this stuff and are really motivated by it and want to be involved with companies that are clearly caring about it. And so we need to keep communicating about it. We have more Latino workers coming in, and Latino people care more about it than any other demographic. And we need to be communicating with Latino workers about it, because we know that it's a big deal for them. So as we acknowledge the demographics of our workforces, we also need to be communicating about this stuff. And so it's really, really important that we keep the communication lines open around these things, and acknowledging how fluid those conversations are going to have to be. So,
yeah, there's immediately lots of like thoughts swirling around, but I appreciate the mention of like the change is going to happen. So either, get on board or get dragged is kind of how I like to look at it sometimes. Because if it's gonna run away from you, I'd rather be sitting like fully involved, in the cart than being pulled behind the horse. And I think one of the things that we've talked about for a very long time in different facets of the Industry 4.0 Club is how are we making manufacturing, more attractive and more appealing to the workforce. And that really started, at least when I came on board to the Industry 4.0 Club, we were facing, it was the height of COVID, facing severe labor shortages, people not wanting to go for work for like health reasons and motivations of, there's a myriad of things going on. And while that has lessened to some degree, it's still shifting of how are we going to get people into kind of manufacturing and kind of touching on those motivations that are going to be important for the future workforce, for, Gen Z and millennials who are looking to change jobs or entering the workforce. Tapping into those motivators that we were discussing earlier is going to be really important, and kind of giving people that sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. So I think that just that call to action of, it's important not only for your bottom line, but also for the future of your company and our planet. It really connects at a lot of deep levels, which is kind of where you're also saying that it's rare that an initiative like this hits all three, areas and motivators for people.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to.
That's actually a great question, Grace. And sorry to put you on the spot, Rhiannon. In your experience, how have companies taken those three motivators and gone out to attract that Gen Z workforce, that Latino workforce into manufacturing? Because that it's still, even post-COVID, it's still a struggle getting the workforce to even look at manufacturing as an option.
I'm not sure that they have. I have a soapbox
to be done.
Okay, what can we do? Yeah. Sign me up for that soapbox, because I want to be on it. Because come on, like really? Because it's a warehouse manufacturing. Come on now. Yeah, I'm not sure that they have effectively. I'm not sure that they understand the motivators well enough. But I will go out and give that speech anytime. I'm so passionate about that. Yeah. I'm not sure we're selling that as well as we could be.
Wow.
As an industry, I don't think we are.
I will say, I think for just kind of as a little silver lining of some hope here is that as, at least like millennials kind of continue to advance in the workforce, while I think demographically there's still going to be a lot more passion around climate change coming from Gen Z, it's definitely within the millennial generation as well. And as those folks reach leadership positions, it is becoming naturally more of a priority for, the work that they're doing. I know millennials at the head of manufacturing companies that are in circular economy and like very, very focused in on sustainability. So I think with some of that demographic shifting, we are going to see a little bit more of that kind of come to the forefront. We're seeing that shift happening. So I think, like the change is going to happen. I think, Rhiannon, as you mentioned, the question is, can we accelerate that? And can we, get more people on board to take action sooner rather than later?
Yeah. And make it just a default conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because in my eyes, I want the goal to be that when that change comes to the point that it's happening in fruition, that we're ready. that it's not a surprise, it's not a shock, it's not a mad dash to get ready. It's like, okay, the resources have been depleted, and we're like, okay, we're ready.
Yeah, yeah, and we aren't seeding. We aren't seeding the ground. I just started reading Temple Grandin's book about visual thinking, and one of the things that she's talking about is, why we should be at the forefront of innovation. We should be having more innovative conversations than we are, and this is part of having innovative conversations, is incorporating sustainability into innovation. They should be connected to each other.
Mm-hmm. So we've been asking a number of our guests this in this series on sustainability. So I think there's the classic 3 Re's of sustainability. So reuse, recycle, reduce. I think those are the Re's that people are most familiar with, but there's so many more that kind of touch on sustainability: repair, rental, recovery, regenerate. Which of these terms are, like, in addition to the 3 like R's, is most important to you, and why?
I'm always going to say regenerate. For a couple reasons. I think one is in sustainability generally, there's a little bit of caution about sustainability, because you don't want it to imply that we're going to sustain lifestyles and resource use as it is, right? Sustainability needs to be defined not as sustaining things as they are, but as sustaining as reaching sustainable levels that we can maintain. And there's a difference there. Does that make sense? So that we have to sort of bring things down to a more sustainable level. I love regenerate, because regeneration is about the idea of that we can create things that are actually healing other processes. Like, I was just reading about a furniture company that's actually pulling used fishing nets, the fishing nets that dolphins and things get caught in, and creating furniture out of used fishing nets, right? So their supply chain is actually using plastic from used fishing nets to create lawn furniture. So you're actually healing something with your supply chain. You're not just reusing something, you're healing an entire ecosystem. That's regenerative.
Yeah. And I think I love that you picked that one, just because I think over the course of this conversation, there's been a couple mentions of, we're not going to have new raw materials, right? And so I think oftentimes when we think about the future, it's this magical place where all of our problems are solved. We tend to be very optimistic about the future. But if we're not putting things in practice today that are going to support that future, of like, we don't want to get to a place where, no new raw materials exist. And I'd say, just because, it would be great if those still existed, but then we didn't have to touch them because we had new value streams and sources of procurement. But we don't want to get to a place where, like, we've depleted all of our natural resources, and so now the only choices that we have are things that have been previously used. And I think a lot of times we just kind of put that burden off on the future and don't really think about, like, how we are taking action on that today. And then how are we also preserving kind of the world and environment and things that we like to enjoy for the future. So working on things that are regenerative, because the earth does have capacity to heal. I don't think that oftentimes we think about it that way, like we're the only species or beings that have any control. The earth can, I think, is remarkably resilient, but by choosing things that are kind of healing ecosystems, like you mentioned with the fishing lines, and helping that taking out kind of waste from these ecosystems, is going to be really important for a future that I think we all imagine and dream of. So that's my little soapbox there on regeneration.
Rhiannon, I have an odd question for you. Again, in your experience and the people that you've encountered, I found it interesting when you established the difference in sustainability and what it actually means and what people think. are there a lot of people that understand or realize the difference? Because I'll be honest, I did not. Until you explained it, I was like, oh, huh.
I don't know that people are thinking about it that deeply yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think hopefully let this be a point where people can kind of ponder it a little bit more. Right? So it's really great that we've had this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you first started talking about it, it's like, well, I know what sustainability is. And then the more you explain it, it's like, no, Karen, you do not. Because what she just said is what you were thinking, and that's not okay. Hush up and learn something. And it's like, okay, so if I have the misconception that I had, how many other people in the planet are thinking the same thing?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Fascinating.
It's a complicated journey, you know, but we're all in it together, and we're all doing our little piece.
Oh, absolutely. Now we are approaching the end. But before we close, I definitely want to get final thoughts and takeaways. And sorry, Grace, I want to start with Rhiannon first.
Oh, by all means, please. This Carol always chooses me first, usually when we're together, and so I'm so happy not to be first. That's fine.
Just because actually, I'm wishing that we had another 30 minutes, but I'm looking at the timer and it's like, okay, let me at least squeeze last takeaway while I have her.
I think, you know, one of the profound things I come back to a lot is you don't have to do everything, but you have to do something. And I think, but I think the important thing, if people don't take one thing away, I want it to be that think really carefully about your communication, and about what's threatening and what isn't, in not just in your sustainability change, but in all the changes that we talk about in Industry 4.0, because we talk about them a lot. So think really carefully about how we communicate things, and really empathetically about what might be threatening, because all of this stuff can be threatening to people in different ways that we don't realize. And it's worth being really meticulous about threat, but recognize that there's so much, it's so exciting. There's so much opportunity in this sustainability conversation to bring new people on board and get people excited about the potential of manufacturing to do things differently all across the board, all across the product life cycle.
Wow. No, we can't add 30 minutes, huh? Oh, okay. Great.
Do part 3. I'm gonna really have to echo, you know, what Rhiannon said about the communication bit, because I think it's change. With the classic, what phrase is the only constant is change. I like to think that I'm someone who, you know, has a pretty good visceral understanding of change, just because of the changes that I've put myself through, like voluntarily. But being able to communicate that kind of with other people and have that kind of empathy makes you just a very effective teammate in a lot of different ways. And it's messy and certainly difficult, but I just really enjoy having conversations like this that I find very encouraging and inspirational around how to have, you know, productive conversations around change, like for the better. So I think that's really my takeaway, is that yes, things can also be, you know, grim and a lot of times, but there is hope and we can do something about it. I also appreciate that, you know, don't do everything, just do something, because there is a tendency for a lot of folks to get overwhelmed. And even if you're just looking within the 4 walls of, you know, your organization and looking at big changes, like that can often be overwhelming, but taking things one piece at a time, it's really the only way to start.
Awesome. I have to go along with you, as you and Rhiannon, is the communication, just because conversations that I have with other people, it's that uncertainty and that threat that you mentioned from the very beginning, and the shutdown, and it's like that could have been avoided with clear, transparent communication, and then knowing the motivators and how to work that into the communication plan. I probably have to say that was one of my favorite parts. And also learning about just how the brain works. And if you have any pictures of the scans with the threats, it's like, oh, send them my way. I want to see what it looks like.
Before we close really quick, I just want to give a quick shout out to Angela, who's been blowing up our comments.
Thank you, Angela.
Yes, thank you, Angela.
Talking about the digital product passport, fantastic idea. She also recommends just checking out the European Aviation Authority, their work in supply chain and kind of material traceability. And then just a ending here that she really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks, Angela, for hanging out with us this hour.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Well, before we close, I definitely want to thank you, Rhiannon, for joining us in this conversation. I appreciate the conversation, the knowledge, the experience, and I will jump at any opportunity to pick your brain. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you like conversations like this, because I know I did, and you want updates and notifications, we definitely encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, Industry 4.0 Club, subscribe to our awesome newsletter, the Substack newsletter called Shaping the Future, and check out our website at industry4.0.com. Definitely wish you all a great rest of the day, and stay warm and dry in whatever climate that you're facing.
All right. Thank you, Rhiannon. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.